Good afternoon. You're listening to Ed Nation on CastleRockRadio.com. I'm Chris Cutter, Assistant Superintendent of Douglas County School District.
And I'm Dan McMenemy, Assistant Superintendent of Douglas County School District.
Otherwise known as Dan and Chris.
That's right. That's right. Hey, we just had a great show, Chris, an hour long talking about PISA testing. And, for those of you that are just joining us right now, PISA testing is an international test that benchmarks our students against 15-year-olds across the world.
The world. I mean, everyone does this test.
It was unbelievable. And Andy Abner and Corey Wise, two of our principals, Rock Canyon and Legend High School, respectively, they participated in it this year.
Now, we don't do it regularly, right?
We don't do it regularly, but there was some really excellent results that we got from that, not only from a testing perspective and the information gain, but from being able to look at our schools from an international perspective, which was very, very interesting. So if you have an opportunity and you can go back in the archives, it might be a good show to listen to, and I'm probably going to allude to it a little bit today during our show, but it was a really good session.
Excellent. So this is the show where we talk about stuff nationally and locally. Where do you want to start today?
Well, it was not a big week in the publications. I don't think I got all of my publications this week, or somebody's taken them. So, I'm sure there was a few stories, but there's some interesting information coming out of the Capitol right now with the finance bill. I think we probably want to cover a little bit of that, possibly.
Yeah, and a couple of interesting stories locally, certainly around Denver Public Schools. Looking forward to a board election this fall, and we've talked several times about how board elections are becoming national attention getters. Certainly LA spending $6 million on 3 different candidates to run for 3 board seats. I mean, this is, unprecedented. This is new ground. And it looks like Denver might be the next district to actually embark on this national tabloid sort of coverage.
Well, and I think that part of that is probably around the polarization of some of the issues that people are coming up against. I mean, last week we talked about closing several schools in Chicago, and right on the heels of a new contract.
Right, $1 billion deficit.
Expending millions and millions of dollars in salaries and then turning around and closing schools. I mean, those are big ticket things that polarize people's opinions. And so it's probably no surprise that these are becoming such national looking situations.
Well, and I think, as a superintendent who comes into these positions, they're working on a master plan that ultimately is for the benefit of kids, right? You have to have the support of your board, at least a majority. So when these things come along, the board majority and the intention, the philosophy behind them can swing. So as you can see in LA and in Chicago, LA managed to keep their majority, so that's a strategic plan for Los Angeles Unified can continue to go. On the other hand, Chicago, that superintendent left a year ago now. So, they're left with that big deficit. They'll be coming up to board election seats this fall. I mean, what are they going to do, and how are they going to move forward? What's going to be the priorities for them?
Definitely challenging.
Very.
Definitely challenging. Very. So what do you got? I see you have the newspaper. You must have taken mine.
I want to start off. I normally would save this for the last quarter of our show, but this is just fascinating to me. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Now, in Douglas County, we have had a choice initiative for a long time. There have been other districts who have done things like a school selector tool, which basically means anybody, it's targeted to a parent, could go online, kind of start looking at different criteria, trying to match a teaching style to their kids' learning style. Try to find the best place where their kids are going to be the most successful, right? Let's just call it a school selector tool, right? Well, New York City, which is 600,000 kids or so it's a big system. Mm-hmm. They decided that they would try to do a school match system like this, and kids could put in their first, second, third choice, that kind of stuff, right? Well, this is what amazes me about this. All right. The New York scale, with a formula that was so complex that the 2003 design of it, the person who designed it, his name's Alvin Roth. The formula to calculate the school selector was so complex that this year he won a Nobel Prize for it.
Sounds like the Colorado Finance Act.
Yes, because the Finance Act, when it went to the state legislature, they couldn't figure out how to do it either. They had to come back and do it again. Isn't that amazing? Now, he did this in 2003. He wins the 2012 Nobel Prize for Economics because of this formula. Now, there's a interesting amount of data. It is very complex. It not only weighs the first, second, third choices, but it takes a weighted factor in terms of where you're from. If you were to qualify for free and reduced lunch, there is an assessment that goes with this that the student must take so that it gives data as of the application prior to it. I mean, it's really, like it says, complex.
So I think one of the challenges in my mind would be, I mean, I think we've all heard about the challenges of the New York City school system.
Sure.
Is there 100% of quality choices for people, or are all 600,000 students trying to funnel into 25% of the schools in New York City?
And that's what's really interesting about this data is that the kids that are in neighborhoods with low-performing schools generally choose those schools anyways. They're not looking for a school that may have, and they do grades A, B, C, and D, E, and F. If they're in a D, E, and F area, chances are they pick, if not their neighborhood, another D, E, and F school. Whereas the same is true of the students that reside in an A, B, C neighborhood, that they choose, if not their own neighborhood school, a school that's A, B, or C.
So is that more about demographics or peer groups or location?
They're looking.
Yes.
They're going to look at that a little further. Try to figure out why that is. Is it transportation? Is it accessibility? The other thing that they found too is that the formula didn't necessarily prioritize you if you were moving from a D, E, F area to an A, B, C area. So they were wondering if there was an equity issue in this, and that's where they're going next with it.
Interesting.
But if they get a guy who develops a formula that's so complex that he wins a Nobel Prize, you think they could invite him back to figure out whether or not it's
to farm the data out of there, that's for sure. Yeah, and I think that has some interesting implications for what we're trying to do in Douglas County. I mean, you gave a great presentation. Dr. Hodges gave a great presentation last evening about all the different choices that our schools are pursuing in our district. And it's really started on fire at the elementary school for sure, and now some of it's starting to matriculate toward the middle schools.
Well, let's give secondary, credit where it's due. They've been ahead of this for a long time. They have had career pathways. They have career tech ed. They've had a lot of things in place that really catered to kids' preferences. The culinary, the engineering tracks, the firefighting track.
Right.
I mean, those were, very innovative. Elementary's kind of just catching up.
But I think the other part of that discussion is at the core of it, you still have to provide a comprehensive high school education, no matter what school our students are going to go to. It has to be a world-class education that's going to allow them to get to the next place they want. Then from there, you can drive based on student needs and wants. I remember opening Rock Canyon High School. One of the first things I did was went down and looked at 6th and 7th and 8th grade TCAP scores, and they were CSAP scores at that point, and then interest inventories that students had done, and started thinking about, okay, how are we going to build this school out? But you really didn't know necessarily what it was going to look like until you actually put courses in front of a student and let them make course requests. And I think that's one of the beauties of the way that we run our high schools in Douglas County, is that we give kids the opportunity to weigh in against what courses they want to take, and that drives the courses that we offer. And I think that's an important piece. Now, you have to have a vision for the bigger picture. I mean, we knew that there was going to be students that were interested in culinary arts. We knew it wasn't going to be enough to have a culinary arts program at every single building, but where can you put that program so that kids can be attracted to it? And oh, by the way, is there a place you can also put it where kids from other school districts can be attracted to it? Because that's an opportunity to make some money. And so those are some of the things that we had discussions about,
Well, and I think it's when we talk about choice, we have to talk about the depth of choice. The New York City choice model is just access. I mean, it's not really about programmatic. It's really just we want everybody to be able to choose what school they go to. Take it to the next level. We want to have a variety of programmatic choices or philosophical, foundational choices for that school. Big ones like IB. That would be a school-wide choice. Montessori would be a school-wide choice. We have a number of charter schools that are core knowledge. That's another choice. Those are school-wide. And then there's the other bits of choices too. I mean, we do have parents that tell me what schools have uniforms because that's what they think is going to be best for their kid, or tell me which one has full-day kindergarten.
Right.
Because that's what they want. I mean, their choices is a all-encompassing kind of endeavor. There are multitudes of ways we can go down this, and we're trying to go down certainly philosophically. We're trying to go down it programmatically, and we're trying to go down it in a way that we can present a tool, maybe not by a Nobel Prize winning economist,
Right.
but we do want to have an easy access for parents to not only access our schools, find out more information, but ultimately enroll and make the best choices for their kids.
And I agree with that. And I think that's one of the beauties of what we're doing is we have a multitude of opportunities, but all of them are excellent choices. And so, you really can't go wrong. All you're doing is when you're making a choice is you're improving the opportunity for your student based on your feelings. But every one of our schools is an excellent opportunity for kids.
I agree.
What else you got there? See a lot of stuff highlighted.
I like you kind of went through and was thinking about some of the big things that had come our way this week. We talked over and over again. I mean, everybody, I think, pretty much who follows education recognizes that the Common Core, which is a collection of standards that are supposed to be rigorous for all students, kindergarten through grade 12, have been adopted in most states. I think people are having a little buyer's remorse. Some of those early adopters are kind of coming back, and we were talking about how when you have different board members and different priorities and you have different majorities on boards like LA and what looks like Denver Public Schools, sometimes those incentives, the reason to do things change. Well, Alabama happens to be one of those first states trying to jump off the boat. So the Senate Education Committee in Alabama tabled a bill this week that would require them to drop the standards. The bill would have prevented the state board, which adopted them in 2010, from implementing them. So now you can imagine state school superintendents and business leaders were pleading not to abandon the case. But in Alabama, it's becoming a party politic debate. It's Democrats saying, let's do it, and Republicans saying Common Core is not the way to go. So as we approach another election, we're going to have not just in districts, but now this argument's going to be elevated to states.
And I think the difficult thing about that is it is becoming a us versus them argument rather than what's going to be in the best interest of students moving forward and preparing students for their future. I mean, I don't think anybody is going to argue that we have to have some minimum expectations for students at grade levels and when they walk out of our schools. Where a community wants to go with that is really their opportunity, and that's one of the things I really like about Colorado is with local control, you get a lot of freedom to make decisions that fit your specific community. And, there's going to be some baseline things that everybody has to do, but it's unfortunate that I think some of these things that were well-intended and, for the good of all are now going to start splintering off into discussions about, well, if you like it, I don't like it. And I don't care what it is. I just don't like it because I don't like you.
Right.
And that's going to be too bad.
Well, and I'm glad you brought it up because that's where I wanted to go with it. I mean, you got to remember who's at the target here, and that is, student learning. We have had things to teach to forever. You and I are kind of old school. We kind of showed up on our first day of class and we got a bunch of textbooks and we were told just to, follow the pacing guide. We're not at that point anymore, but we still have, whether it's Common Core standards, we still have benchmarks, we have indicators, we have content that must be delivered at each grade level. I mean, even Westminster here in Colorado, that school district got rid of the grading, like you're not in first or second or third grade, but they still had benchmarks and they still had content they were teaching to. So quite honestly, Common Core or not, there's always going to be something. And I know some people kind of kid Common Floor, Common Core, however you want to phrase it. There is a bare minimum that must be taught. And the idea of having it consistent throughout all districts isn't bad. But like you said, the idea of letting districts take it to the next level is even more exciting. We here in Douglas County, we've taken the Common Core and made it the guaranteed viable curriculum by basically filtering it through Bloom's. So maybe when we come back from break, we can start talking about how guaranteed viable curriculum looks for a really robust academic institution, certainly a district like ours.
Yeah, and I'd also like to talk about the fruits of that labor.
Right.
So when we come back.
You've been listening to Ed Nation on CastleRockRadio.com. Welcome back. You're listening to Ed Nation on CastleRockRadio.com. He's Dan, I'm Chris, and we were talking about the GVCs, which in non-acronym world is the Guaranteed and Viable Curriculum. What we did when we first got the Common Core here in Douglas County was a couple of our curriculum experts took a really hard look at them. Now, they certainly had dialed down some expectations, or dialed them up, but moved them down grades. You know, I think it was 7th or 6th grade math became 5th grade math, that kind of stuff. So the rigor was there just in the sense that the expectations were now higher. Problem I think we found originally was when we kind of filtered them through Bloom's, which is the hierarchy of basic, I don't know, how would you describe it? I mean...
Basically levels of acquiring knowledge and being able to use that knowledge. So you start with knowledge, basically just being able to write it down or regurgitate information that you
memorize
learn
it,
and then forget it. And you work your way all the way up to synthesis and application
and creation,
in new and creative ways. I mean, it's taking the knowledge that you have and actually using it to do something in a new and creative way is the ultimate tip of the iceberg.
So the bottom two are knowledge and application. They don't have long-lasting...
Right, which is basically what we lived in our educational year. I mean, think about a chemistry class you had in high school where you went in and learned formulas. And
you had to memorize the periodic table of elements. I
That's
mean,
right.
I'm sure that we have adults that are still haunted by that big grid of letters.
They are.
So what we did is some of the experts in the district kind of filtered it through, and they found that there were a whole lot of those knowledge ones, those memorize and remember. And there were some that went to that stage 2 piece of it, which is still not very high, of application. But really nothing breached the analyze, the synthesize, the evaluate, and there was nowhere anywhere near create.
And so I think it might be important to pause now and talk just for a moment about why is it important for kids to be able to synthesize and create in this world that is going to be their future, not our past.
Right.
I think it's important to note that, you know, the knowledge base, kids can access that in a second on a phone. I can ask them a question, they can Google it, they can have that information right now. They don't have to recall anything.
Right. And there's a commercial about the 50 states, and they're making fun of teacher teaching the memorization. The capital of Denver, Colorado is, and then the class all in unison says it. We were in a conference once, and the guy said, all right, pull out your phone. I'm going to ask this lady over here to start reciting the capitals, and I'm going to ask this gentleman next to her to look them up on his phone. Who do you think is going to get that done first? And basically, that's the world that kids live in.
Right.
I mean, I was probably just as guilty as a lot of teachers 15 years ago who did do an activity where kids had to memorize the capitals of all the states.
And so what's important now is that kids have the opportunity to acquire knowledge in the way that, you know, where do I go to get this? And then once I'm there, how do I use it in new and creative ways? I mean, I thought last night at the board meeting was a great example of what we want to see happen in our schools.
With the kiddo
students
with the
that
app?
won the app.
Yeah.
So the short story is this student, Make-A-Wish Foundation, Rock Canyon High School, they've set records the last 3 years for dollars collected and granting wishes for students. I think
for the Make-A-Wish Foundation.
$60,000 this year, granted 8 wishes for kids. I mean, huge deal. Well, this student sat down there and one of his teachers came and said, you know what, there's this app competition, so making some type of app. And immediately the way that student described it was he thought, wow, that'd be cool to be a part of that. Let's just sit down and brainstorm ideas. So they sat down as a group of kids, 4 or 5 of them. They brainstormed these ideas. They came up with this app. They submitted it. The short story is they won this $10,000 for the school. They each won a Samsung Galaxy, very cool. But they also get the notoriety of creating an app that's actually going to be useful in the world.
Yeah.
And the app is actually being able to go in and say, you know, I have X number of dollars I want to donate toward a certain cause. You go in and put that information in this app, and it automatically populates. Here's some things you might want to consider giving that money to.
Right.
All across the world. It pulls all that information from somewhere else.
And a feedback mechanism for people who have given donations to rank it, almost as if you were buying a product online where you can look at the ratings of people who bought it ahead of you and what kind of experience they had with it. They're now doing this. And what I thought was great was that this kiddo said, well, we were brainstorming, we got this idea to connect it to our Make-A-Wish, and I thought, well, how can I make this a little better? The student took the original idea and made it better.
Right.
And that is the higher level of Bloom's.
That's the world our kids are going to live in.
Exactly.
That we have to get to.
So remembering, memorizing, regurgitating, that kind of stuff isn't, we don't live in a Jeopardy society anymore. You don't have to be able to recall extraneous facts at the, any second.
So, and that was one of the fascinating things about talking with Principal Abner about the PISA test. The focus of the PISA test is more about critical thinking and process rather than being able to 2 + 2 is 4, 4 + 4 is 8 kind of thing. And so, that's the next place that testing is going to. And you don't have to ask every single kid that question to figure out if the instruction they're getting in classrooms is allowing them to do that. Because if you ask a sample of kids, and that sample of kids is representative of your school in terms of demographics or age groups or whatever, you can get a pretty good picture of what's happening in classrooms without drilling down to specific students in specific teachers' classrooms. Fascinating.
Yes. So I just recalled something I had read, so I'm pulling it up here. They're talking about STEM and how to test engineering. So there's actually a group. It's the National Association of Educational Progress, and I'm going to get to this whole testing, this whole assessing piece of higher order skills that you were just talking about. They are going to craft a new technology and engineering literacy test. It's going to be called the TEL, and they're going to use it on 20,000 students next year. They're demanding that we go beyond the application of knowledge, that just the regurgitation, the remembering of knowledge is no longer, is remembering a word? I think it is.
Sure it is.
Yeah, the remembering of knowledge is no longer. So what they say is roughly 20% of the questions will cover concrete facts. That's that lower level we were just talking about. But the rest will use a new kind of question, which requires students to interact with it in scenarios, to apply ways of critical thinking and problem solving that are associated with engineering. So the new test is no longer going to be list all the capitals of the states. Those kind of questions are going to be 20% of a test, and this is engineering. The other 80% are going to require students to interact, to critical think, to manipulate, to evaluate, to synthesize information, and to go beyond those lower levels.
Which is really interesting when you take it in the context of a couple weeks ago, we had a career connections session, and there was 2 engineers from Martin Marietta were there. As we did, I think I talked about this last time, but in their presentation, they talked about the kind of person they're looking for their company. By the way, they just hired 60 engineers at about $60K a piece into their system, interns and also first-year engineers, as a direct result of what's going on in North Korea. There's international need for rocket propulsion engineers. And so they went out to schools, they canvassed areas to find people. They weren't necessarily that interested in people that had a 4.5 GPA. They said that would be really interesting if you had a 4.5 GPA and you had been a part of, shown you'd been part of these student groups that do things like, the cars that people make, or the robotics club, or where you've been an exceptional participant in those clubs. In fact, they said we would almost rather have a student with a lower GPA with more of those type of activities, the application piece of it, because they recognize that the GPA as it currently exists is a lot more of a reflection of living in a system of being able to be knowledge driven than an application type driven. So if we could ever make the transition to, your GPA is really an accurate reflection of your ability to synthesize and create and apply, that would be very cool.
Very cool. And when we talk about authentic assessment, this is what we're talking about.
That's right.
Not just testing what really matters, but testing it in a way that really asks students to demonstrate it.
And that also leads to motivation by students. If they're actually doing something and they have to find a way to use it, they're going to be more likely to be engaged in that learning experience.
Yeah. So I think it's all very exciting in terms of where we're going with this. And I remember the guy who invented Atari, oddly enough, also invented Chuck E. Cheese.
Really?
And he was the closing speaker at one of the conferences about a year ago. And he was talking about that his company, his new company, which was kind of Atari-based, was really just learning and game theory put together. grabbing that content and making it such a way that kids want to interact with it because of the same interest they have with any of those simulating role-playing games that they have. I mean, World of Warcraft, which is an online game, at one point had like 14 million people playing it at one time around the world.
Because you get to create.
Yeah, you get to do something. And if we can combine it with learning, and I'll throw this in because I think we're getting closer to our next break, but we've occasionally thrown out an app that, people generally try and like. Well, I've got one for you this time. It's called Simple Physics. And do you know what's great about this? It is high-level high school engineering, yet it could be done by anybody that can access an iPad, who can do the apps and manipulate it. And we've seen YouTube videos of like 18-month-year-olds doing these kind of things. So, and what you are doing is you're building a tree fort.
Right.
But you have to suspend it. So it's all about that whole engineering behind suspension. And then they drop weight on whatever you've built. And if it surpasses, you move to the next level. And then suddenly you're building the roof and snow's falling on it. You've got to design the roof joists so that they're supporting it. And it's really a game centered around the principles of engineering. So if you are in elementary school, it's really just, putting some common sense stuff together and making some jumps. If you're in high school, you can actually mathematically formulate out why, dispersion of weight and, the angle that you're supporting it by. And the final level, I think, is a skyscraper, which my 10-year-old hasn't been able to complete yet, but
I'm sure you're trying.
He's trying all the time. I'm not even going to tell you where I am. So,
well, I think that is the next frontier, is how to merge those two things together. And people are already doing this. I mean, you're already experiencing part of that. But what does a student learn from that they can then go into a classroom and apply? I mean, your son's learning so many other things from doing those type of games that then when he walks into a classroom, he's already had an experience with that, multiple experiences with that, without breaking all the popsicle sticks or stuff like that. So we're going to go to a break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about results and in the traditional sense, and then we'll talk about what results might look like in the future. But you're listening to Castle Rock Radio. This is Dan and Chris.
When you are done, lay your weary to rest, don't you cry no more.
Hey, welcome back to Castle Rock Radio. This is Dan and Chris, and we wanted to talk a little bit about some results, Chris.
I love results.
Well, I love results too, and one of the most frustrating pieces of, I think, both of our jobs is, when we see something in a newspaper that isn't necessarily true, and we know the accuracy or inaccuracy of that statement. And, sometimes we get an opportunity before that's printed to have an opportunity to talk to the reporter, and the reporter may take pieces of what we say or may not. But recently there was an article, it's entitled, "Douglas County Ed Board Taps Carrie Mendoza for a Seat." It was about Dr. Carrie Mendoza, who was just recently appointed to the vacant Board of Education seat. By the way, I think she's a fantastic addition to our board, brings a great background, and looking forward to working with her.
Absolutely. Another great perspective, and it certainly helps. I know she's been sitting in now for the last, has it been a month already?
I think it's been a month already.
Yeah, and we've had a chance to work with her. Now, generally, boards work predominantly through the superintendent, but, we've had a chance to speak with her and talk to her and meet some of her requests. And I'll tell you, it's actually very nice just to have another different perspective on the board.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, what a great background. I mean, an art student, a doctor, an ER doctor.
Yeah.
I mean, really varied background.
I know the segment
amazing.
isn't to talk about Director Mendoza, but yeah, I mean, she got an art history degree because of her passion and then went back and got a medical degree. I mean, how many people do that?
So now the frustrating part, okay? Could have had just a fantastic article about the new addition to our board and
a great
moving
story
forward,
to tell.
But had to go to the next place, and that was to interview a former employee of Douglas County Schools. And in the statement, this former employee said, "We look forward to working with Dr. Mendoza to strengthen our schools and give our kids the great education they deserve. We are greatly concerned that the district has been moving in the wrong direction under the current board leadership. Student achievement and instructional time are both declining, and we hope that Dr. Mendoza will work with us to put as many tax dollars as possible into the classroom, something this board seems to have lost sight of." So, I see this article and I think, wow, the first part was great, the second part not so great, because where's the data to support that statement?
The first part is great, and then there's a personal point of view, and First Amendment rights. Everyone's entitled to to have their view, but the last couple of statements are just blatantly wrong.
So I wrote to Clayton Woolyard, who was the person that wrote this article for the Denver Post Your Hub, and said, "Where's the data to support this statement? I have several points of data to tell a different story." Several. To
Lots.
name a few, and I named a few in here, and I'm going to share those here in a minute, but I went through those with him. Sent the note to him, has my email address, has my phone number. Here's what I get back. Dan, I would encourage you to write a letter to the editor if you wish to dispute the statement. Now, I'm a reasonable guy, Chris, and I'm sure you are too, but that seemed like a rather cold statement to send back. You can write a letter to the editor to dispute a statement that is clearly a personal statement that has no data to support it, that
it's just wrong.
It had no phone call. I mean, it would have been really easy to pick up the phone and go, "Hey, I have this statement. What do you say about this?" I mean, because
is this true?
Yeah, this is our school district.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me give you some data.
Please.
So the two pieces are around student achievement and instructional time are both declining. So data point number 1, graduation requirements across the Front Range. Douglas County School District has the second most graduation requirements at 24 hours per student, or 24 credits per student. Number 1 is Academy, 20, which is down in the Springs. Number 3, the next closest one is Cherry Creek with 22. It runs anywhere from 25 to 17 credits to graduate. The 17 credits are what the higher education admission requirements recommend.
Right.
Littleton has 21 credits.
So we ask
Aurora
for 7
has
more
22.
than what's expected in higher ed.
Significantly more than anyone around us. We ask for more graduation requirements, which brings me to my next point.
So the high expectations are there.
High expectations of graduation requirements. So let's look at the dropout rate in Douglas County. From 2011-12, our dropout rate was 0.8. Okay, 222 dropouts reported. That's out of about 3,500 kids that are graduating.
Right.
In 2009-10, the dropout rate was 1.3. So our dropout rate improved over the last 3 years. So from 1.3 to 0.8. From 367 dropouts in 2009-10 to 222 dropouts in 11-12. That's with a growing student population.
Right.
Point of success. Graduation rate. In 2010, the graduation rate, on-time graduation rate in Douglas County was 83.1%. In 2012, the on-time graduation rate in Douglas County was 87.4.
So it went up 5%.
4% better.
Yeah.
4% better. So higher graduation requirements, lower dropout rate, higher graduation rate. That seems to be successful.
But wait, there's more.
But wait, there's more. Recent article in Ed News Colorado, I think it was yesterday, about 40% of Colorado grads need remediation.
But
this is about matriculation from high school to college, and about, when you take the placement test for a specific college, you have to take more reading, more writing, more math.
So when you get to college, remediation is you have to take some courses to catch up so that you're on par.
That's correct. And by the way, those courses are not funded by the state of Colorado. So you can't get financial aid for those courses. You have to pay for those out of your own pocket. So It has a really significant dollar amount attached to it. So 40% of Colorado grads need remediation. But wait, let's go to Douglas County. In Douglas County, that number is closer to, let me see where the specific number is.
Well, I remember reading that article too as you look for this number, and I remember Douglas County not being anywhere near that.
That's correct. The current remedial rate in Douglas County as of 2011 was 25.6%. That's 1,837 students in a cohort. Now, that's kids that just matriculate to Colorado colleges. They don't keep track of all of our students that leave. But 25.6, not 40%. Oh, and by the way, in 2009, that rate was 25.9.
So it's getting better.
In 2010, that rate was 28.1. And in 2011, it's 25.6. So our remedial rate is favorable.
And how does that compare to other districts around us that are
Boulder Valley School District was probably one of the best in the state. And size-wise, that compares to us, 23.1%. Cherry Creek School District was behind us at 33.4%. And there was one other that I
So
had.
not only are we doing better, we are doing among the best of like districts.
Within 2% of the highest performing district in remediation rates. So that was another little kernel that we had that was given this time. So, it talked about instructional time in declining. And so I did a little thing, and we're going to do a report on May 7th at the Board of Education about high school scheduling. This has been a point of contention this year in our schools. Obviously, with moving to a new schedule, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. But I just have some data here. I had schools self-report instructional time in their buildings. Instructional time for a credit of 1.0, so one class all year long. At homeroom and access, which is another key facet of many of our buildings, lunchtime and passing time. Here's the data I collected. On district average, the instructional time in our buildings, I have 7 of the 9 high schools reporting out so far, so this data is going to change a little bit before May 7th. But on average, our schools are experiencing 4.97 more hours of instructional time for this school year than we did last year. So instructional time is definitely not declining. In specific schools, it's declining, dependent upon the schedule that they chose. For instance, at a Mountain Vista High School, their hours declined by 7.5 hours on a 1.0 credit for the year. They made some other choices in their schedule that may lead to that decline. At Thunder Ridge and Highlands Ranch High School, 40 more hours of instruction per 1 credit this year than last year. Thunder Ridge, 38 hours more of instruction this year than last year. So then you talked about the average student load. If you remember, one of the things that we tried to do last year when we put in this new schedule was talk about the load on teachers, the number of kids, 30 per kid class, the course loads. We had classes of 35, 36, 37. We were very concerned about that. It was the main reason we went to this schedule. So one of the concerns was around average teacher load. Well, the district average for this year from last year, the average teacher had 136 kids on their caseload. That means all their classes, all the kids in those classes added together. This year, the average teacher load is 140.8. So a difference of 4.8 students by adding another class. I think the fear was we were going to add another class. I'm going to all of a sudden have 30 more kids.
Right.
Clearly, that's not what happened.
No.
And again, here we only have 5 of the 9 schools done at this point, and I'll have better data on May 7th. The average class size dropped by 3 kids from a 28.38 to a 25.08. So that's a great number. The total number of semester classes over 30, and if you take a look at all of our teachers and add up all the classes that had more than 30 kids per school, that's what this number represents. So in the average school in 2011-12, there was 341 classes of 30 or more kids, semester classes. So that means roughly 150 classes a semester had 30 or more kids. This year, that number went down to 129.2. That's a difference of 212 classes of 30 plus.
Amazing.
Huge. That's a huge.
And all we heard was class size was an issue the year before. So
Right. That's exactly right. We addressed that. The total semester class average of over 30, we have a number there of 61.6 last year, 10 this year. So what that number represents is the class average being over 30. So I'm a teacher. How many of my classes, when they're all added together, do I have an average of 30? So if you teach 5 classes and each one of those classes is 31, your average is 31. Well, this is talking about the number of teachers in a building that have that situation. And then the other piece was the total student load over 180 kids. That would be 6 classes of 30 this year. That would have been 5 classes of 35 last year. Well, that number has not significantly changed either. So I think ton more data.
I would love to beat this dead horse all afternoon because it does. It's so frustrating. And you know what? I take it on a bit of a personal level just because when you report something that's so false, what you've done is basically said all the work that teachers have done in this district over the past 2 years, 3 years has been at the detriment of kids, has gone backwards. And we have data that proves that teachers are being more effective with kids than ever before. Why would you knowingly say something so negative about the efforts of our teaching force? It frustrates me to no end.
Especially when you have access to this data anywhere you want it. So when we come back, I got a few more statistics, then we'll jump right into the quick hits.
All right. Welcome back to the last few minutes of Ed Nation with Dan and Chris on CastleRockRadio.com. You know, Dan, I jumped in just before the break because I really felt like I needed to say that, but you had a couple more pieces of data that you wanted to share.
Couple more pieces of data. Let's look at the Colorado ACT test results. In 2011, 21.7 composite in Douglas County. 2012, 21.7 composite in Douglas County. That score is 1.7 points above the rest of the state and above national average, no doubt. So great effort on part of our students and teachers. Let's take a look at some AP results from 2007-8 to 2011-12. In virtually every single AP testing category, we had more students take AP tests. And if you're familiar with those are tests that can give kids college credit. They're also a great indicator of the rigor of academics going on in your building. In addition, in Douglas County, in 2007-8, we gave 2,930 individual tests. In 2011-12, we gave 7,820 individual tests, so more than doubled the amount of AP testing in our district. We didn't more than double our students in our district. What that means is that's all about access. Males, females, different courses, different subgroups, all that data is available on the CDE website.
More kids taking more rigorous classes, enrolling in more rigorous examinations.
Absolutely. Now let's talk a little bit about concurrent enrollment, which is a partner to AP, and we've talked about this on the show. This is college credit that students get in our high school classes. We have a lot of teachers that are working very hard at this. In 2010-11, we had 6,650 total participants in CTE programming. That's Career and Tech Ed programming. In 2012 and 13, we almost doubled that to 11,531 students. Now, given this was also an environment of budget reductions, that is an amazing number. So almost twice the access for career and technical ed for our students. You know, Christy Pegg came on board a couple weeks ago and talked about all the student organization winning groups that we've had. Concurrent enrollment, 1311 students in 1011, 2842 in 1213. The hours, credit hours earned, 4,106 hours in 1011, 9,049 this last year.
Which is doubled, which is amazing.
Clearly, we have a lot of people in our district that are doing a lot of great work. And Mr. Woolyard, I would invite the opportunity for you to call me and we can talk through data, and I would love that opportunity to do that.
Or please just check it before, because
just check.
It's not even close. I mean,
just
spent 10 minutes for, giving data, and I'm sure there's more.
There is more, but I want to move on to some other stuff as well.
Let's move on. Do you know, Florida has been known as a reform state. They've done a lot of different things that other states have jumped on board. They are certainly Common Core abundant, but they were one of the first to give school grades in terms of, this school is an A, this school is a B, and that's been modeled in various formats. One of the other things they did was they were one of the first to actually change the teacher evaluation system, which Colorado jumped on board with, to have an element of practitioner-based, what you do with kids, and then results-based counted in your evaluation. Well, would you believe that the Florida teachers have decided they're going to sue the state? Did you read this?
I did read that, and I think that was all about what we're calling Standard 6, correct? Mm-hmm. It was about using test scores as a part of the evaluation.
Yeah, they were looking at it, and, they don't really have any beef over practitioner piece. I mean, what you do in class can be measured with a trained evaluator. What they don't like, though, is in their rating was data from students that they have no contact with. I got to tell you, I'm siding with the teachers on this one.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if I'm a high school 12th grade music teacher, band orchestra, and I have kids in my class, how on earth are you going to assess me against TCAP?
Exactly. And, I don't touch them for math. I don't touch them for reading. How can you use those scores against me just because I do teach them for music? We've had an opportunity to work with some small groups of representative for job alike, music teachers being one of them. And there are assessments that they can show growth in development of not just reading music, but performance. I was talking to a guy in one of our high schools, and he has a machine that he can hook up to his drum set, and it can test the rhythmic timing of a piece of music as a student's playing it. And it gives feedback to the student on how off or close they are to being on two, and it shows like a pre and post evaluation. It's fascinating. And because I never taught music, I never even knew this existed. But when we were talking about, how to measure his performance, he came forward and said, this is one way you can measure it. I mean, there are ways to do it. And I found this in everything. You taught PE. You know there are assessments for kids. I mean, quite honestly, if you're helping kids, build strength or stamina or anything like that, coordination, those can be tested.
And I think that's really important. And that's one of the things I'm most proud about the work that we're doing is involving teachers with describing what does a good performance looks like in your classroom, having those discussions, having them be an active part in that. We have some fabulous teachers that have way more information about how to assess students in their classroom than any one of us will ever know.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've come a long way. So we'll probably be talking about it on the show as it develops, but I don't know if they launched that yesterday or not, but.
Yay, Florida.
Yay, Florida. All right. We got about 5 minutes, so I'm going to see how many of these last ones we can get through. All right, you ready for this?
Yes.
So North Carolina, the State Board of Education has mandated, has assigned that they craft a new digital teaching and learning standards for administrators. You got any idea what that might look like?
I do not.
Yeah, me neither. I mean, they want it to be in all aspiring teachers in their program. I can't wait to see what this looks like. I mean, just on title alone, digital teaching and learning, yeah, that sounds great. Mm-hmm. But I don't even know who you'd bring in to start. I mean, some of your best blended learning teachers, maybe?
Yeah, probably.
So,
don't they have a pretty extensive online program in North Carolina? I think they have a statewide program in North Carolina.
Yeah, you might be right.
Online learning.
We'll have to look at that.
Yeah.
All right. So in another test, I think this one's been researched 1,000 times, but it turns out that researchers, and I won't even cross the nation, using PISA data, you like this?
PISA.
So found that girls' achievement in reading was better than boys, and boys' achievement in math was better than girls.
Well, is that article from the 90s?
I think I heard a duh from the next room.
Well, but, I think that's really interesting because I think that we might have some data in Douglas County that would refute that. I mean, I know I looked really hard at that when I was a building principal around TCAP and CSAP, and the performance levels of students in your building. And I think there's some surprising data that might be different than that when it's in our district.
Exactly. And and we should probably try to bring that back next time because I bet you we do.
Well, I bet I have it in this pile. I'll look for it while you're going to the next
I bet
one.
You do. All right. So the National Center of Education Statistics found that we're offering more math classes. And it's more of a range. We have beginner, intermediate, and rigorous math. Guess what? Research shows if you take rigorous math, you learn more math.
Okay.
We spend money on these kind of things. It just kind of baffles me.
Right.
So, I mean, what did they expect to find?
I don't know, but you always have a couple of those during this time.
All right. So, do you remember back, and I think when we both started, you weren't allowed to track students, and that was basically putting kids in groups based on their abilities?
Right. The red birds, the blue birds.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, after being condemned as discriminatory in the 90s, grouping students by academic ability seems to be back in vogue. I'm reading this. That's not a word I'd usually use.
Right.
With a new generation of teachers. So the College of Statistics found that sorting students into different courses by previous academic test performance was associated with higher academic gains.
Well, I think that makes sense. I mean, you get an opportunity to personalize learning.
Exactly.
Is exactly what that's about, differentiation and personalized learning.
I think originally that it was targeted that you weren't putting kids in socioeconomic or gender or maybe minority-based groupings, and that was why tracking was bad. But teaching to a small group of students based on their like needs is just good practice.
Well, and also being able to differentiate time to those specific groups, that's huge.
So one thing that you brought up last week was that elementary principal that went from elementary principal to superintendent of San Diego.
Yes.
I got a chance to read that story, and I still don't know how she got the job.
It didn't say in there.
It didn't.
It never. I mean, it was like there was some miraculous.
The board went behind closed doors, and they announced it the day after the previous superintendent was retiring. So, I mean, there's no public input. They just.
Yeah.
So, because when you read that, I thought, no. And
I thought there was going to be some kind of process. I reread it too, and I didn't find it.
Yeah. All right, we got 1 minute, so let's finish with this one. You ready? So, New York State, which we love to talk about, is buying a curriculum.
Really?
Guess how much it's going to cost them?
I'm betting they don't have the the national award winner on developing that curriculum. $28 million.
It's going to cost them.
I saw the number. I cheated.
$28,335,642 to be exact. I'm surprised there's not cents. From 4 vendors to build a curriculum. We're in the wrong business.
Exactly.
We should be selling our guaranteed and viable
$28
curriculum.
million. So anyway, we thank all of you for joining us today. Felt like we had a really good show. I do want to apologize if I came across strong with that data piece, Chris, but I am just so competitive. It just bothers me to no end when someone makes an inaccurate statement. We certainly have things we can work on, and Douglas County Schools prides itself in continuous improvement, but we have a ton of things to celebrate that are going absolutely fantastic in this district.
And I don't think we should apologize for correcting misinformation. We just speak the truth. So you've been listening to Dan and Chris on Ed Nation, CastleRockRadio.com.